So if you're recording, Yuri, I'll kick it off.
Yep.
Great. All right, everyone. Welcome to our monthly OTSC call. I'll be your MC today. We're going to go around the room and try to do just a quick intro. So if you can say your name, where you work, and your relation to OpenTracing in a single line, that'd be great. And since I don't believe there's a stable participants list necessarily, I'll just be calling people off. So first off is me. My name's Ted Young. I work at Lightstep, and I'm just a contributor. So BHS, you want to introduce yourself?
On mute.
He's maybe muted. All right. How about you go, Yuri?
All right, I'm Yuri Shkuro. I work at Uber. I'm a member of the Specification Council for OT.
Great. I see we've got Francois on the call.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so I'm François Jacques, French, obviously, and I'm an architect at Murex. And I just did the OpenTracing P6 contribution.
Great. Welcome.
Thanks.
Carlos Alberto?
Yeah, so basically my name is Carlos Cortez, and I am working with Lightstep, and I am a contributor as well.
Yeah. Gary Brown?
Hi, I work for Red Hat on tracing-related technologies, OpenTracing, Jaeger, Istio, and Envoy recently.
Great. We've got two Jonathans. Let's start with Jonathan Caldor.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Caldor. I work at Facebook on the Canopy team. So we do basically distributed tracing through Facebook. We don't use OpenTracing right now, so I'm mostly here as just a, I guess, industrial advisor, I think is the technical term.
Yeah.
Mostly just here to listen.
Great. And we've got Jonathan Mace on the call, it looks like.
Can you hear me?
We can now.
Cool. Hey, I'm Jonathan Mace. I do research in tracing. I'm at Brown University. And I also have a real loose relationship with Facebook and the other Jonathan.
Welcome. Pavel?
Hi, I'm Pavel Lofai. I work at Red Hat. I work on OpenTracing, OpenTracing instrumentations, and Jaeger project.
Great. Manu, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, so hello everyone, I'm Manu. I work for Datadog as a software engineer. Actually, I'm taking care of everything related to OpenTracing and Datadog, and I'm trying to be a contributor with the Python implementation.
Sweet. It looks like we got Tyler also from Datadog here.
Yep.
Actually, he's not available.
I actually jumped on Manu.
Ah, okay, sorry.
I'm at the airport. I wasn't sure if I'd have time to make it, but I'm here.
Awesome. Good
coming back. I'm coming back from AWS reInvent.
We'll do a report back on that. And then we've got Sergey as well.
Yes, so I'm Java developer and I'm working for Lightstep as a contractor.
Great. Welcome, Sergey. And then someone's logged in with a phone number.
It's probably me. Maybe, I don't know. I was muted on Zoom, but not on my phone. This has been I was hit with laryngitis a few days ago, so I sound like I'm dying, but I feel fine. And I work at Lightstep and contribute to OpenTracing when I'm able to time-wise.
Great. All right, so that's our call for today. And I've got the agenda up. We're gonna just kind of go down the list and do an overview of the APIs that are currently in flight. Then there's a bit of talk about the service mesh, maybe a quick report back from Ben on that if his voice is working. And if there's time at the end, we'd love to hear a bit about the Facebook Canopy paper and maybe a brief mention about this language maintainers thing, which is a proposal I've been too swamped to write. But let's kick it off with what I think is the most important thing, which is the v31 release of the Java API. I feel like we're basically ready to put out a second and hopefully final release candidate for the new API. Thanksgiving kind of swamped feedback, I feel. My only concern with getting this thing out right now would be testing the backwards compatibility proposal and making sure that that's actually going to work. It's not going to be perfect no-touch backwards compatibility, but a number of us believe it's really important to have a form of backwards compatibility where you just need to change the import paths on your various libraries and application code, rather than actually change all of your instrumentation and be able to sort of gradually change your instrumentation over from one API style to the other. I'm a little concerned if we don't offer something like that, then people will be really stuck on the old API, and tracers will be stuck having to support sort of a version skew across APIs. And I feel like that's just too much to ask of people, considering that we're a standard. We should be doing the effort to really, try to make that easy for people. So my first question is, does anyone have any feedback or concerns with how that is currently being implemented? And then my next question after that will be, what do we need to do to actually test this in the real world before declaring the release candidate final? So let's start with the first question. Does anyone have any concerns about this approach, or feel like it's not going to work?
Just a question. Is it going to be the adapter or the package v30? It will be a standalone jar. It will be packaged with the jar of OpenTracing API.
Yeah, I believe so. And Carlos, if you want to respond to that.
It will be an artifact, so it will be part of the release. So basically, we have like several artifacts that are the base of OpenTracing, which is like OpenTracing API, OpenTracing mock. So OpenTracing, this V030, it's like just another artifact. So the idea was to separate everything that we're trying to bring and not mess up with the rest of the main stuff. So yeah, it's going to be part of this of our stuff, but it's going to be a separate artifact.
Okay, that's clear. Thanks.
Yeah. So this means the three people who have to change their code, tracers will have to make a modification so that they'll have to issue an artifact that binds to this new namespace, and then they'll be able to use a shim to take their new tracer, the one that conforms to the new 31 API, and use it through a shim in this package that produces a version of the old API. So the hope there is that people who are developing tracers won't need to maintain a 30 and a 31. They can just maintain a 31, and users, when they switch their imports over, will be able to consume updates from that new tracer. The third piece is that libraries, any library instrumentation, will need to have some version of it that also switches over to this, just so the namespaces line up, and we'll need to come up with some, I'm thinking like some standard tag or other way of indicating that this is the shimmed version of this library. So there'll be a need as a community for us to go into all of our library instrumentations and OpenTracing Contrib and elsewhere, and kind of make a tagged version that is set up like that. It shouldn't be a lot of work, but if we don't do that work, then people will be kind of stuck in a weird middle ground.
Can I ask a quick question? Yeah. One thing that's not quite clear to me is, what impact is this going to have on trace implementers? Is this compatibility later going to be just completely transparent? Or is this something that each of the trace implementers are also going to need to implement the interfaces of?
So you should be able, the hope, and this is where I want implementers to actually do this work as a release candidate before we declare it's final. But the hope is that you should be able to just switch your tracer over to the new API. So however you were bridging to OpenTracing, you're going to do the work to bridge to the new 31 API. And then there's a shim layer that will provide continuation support. So the mechanisms for supporting the old 30 API, you shouldn't have to write. You should just be able to focus on 31 and not have to worry about that. And that shim layer will do the reference counting and continuations for you. I'm fairly certain that will work, but it's not clear to me for tracers that we're not using reference counting or we're doing something funny. I mean, I don't mean funny, but I mean different from that model, whether there would be some impedance mismatch to have that reference counting happen on top of them. That's the only thing I can think of that would be a genuine mess there.
Okay, so just to be clear, from a trace implementer perspective, this new shim should have no impact on the things that I might need to implement. I would just implement the 31 API and then all the compatibility would be taken care of by the shim?
Yeah, that's correct. And so when I presume tracers will, retain a version of the 30 API that's out there, but when it comes to continuing to apply patches and doing work on their tracers, they shouldn't have to be pushing 2 versions. You should be able to just move to the 31 version, just have one version of your tracer that's updating, and asking your users if they want to receive those updates to move over. If they want to receive the updates but don't want to update their code to the new API, or they're in the process of doing it, they should be able to use this alternate package.
Okay, so I think that's a little bit better now that I understand that.
Yeah.
I think my next point of feedback is, does this really belong in the main repo, or can this be moved off to the utilities or contrib or something like that, where it's definitely more obviously optional?
Yeah. So there was some debate about that. My feeling is that it really should be in there because this is like a core part of the OpenTracing spec, should be providing a clear path to backwards compatibility. I don't anticipate we're going to be doing, my hope is this is the end of, any kind of API change that would affect instrumentation. We might be adding things to the API that would require tracers to maybe expose more information around correlation IDs. But I'm really hoping we're not going to be doing anything that looks like backwards incompatible changing to the instrumentation model. So we shouldn't be building up like a big pile of these things. But if we don't have it all kind of official, I'm concerned that would just make it more confusing for people.
Well, my concern is that if that's in that main repo, that's basically going to exist there for essentially forever. I don't see us ever really having an opportunity to go in and then remove that. So that's my argument for having that off on a separate repo that isn't necessarily tied to the main code line.
Yeah. For me, backwards compatibility in a specification means it's there forever. You can deprecate, but you can't, unless we go to an OpenTracing 2.0 where we clean house, everything sticks around. But that's my opinion. I'd like to hear other people's opinions.
This is Ben. I feel like there's a lot of merit to having documentation, front and center as part of the project that would explain anything regarding backwards compatibility. There is some kind of aesthetic thing for me about having literally as little as possible in central core location, and it's not necessary to put this there. So by as little as possible, rule of thumb, we would move it somewhere else. But it's not, I don't think anyone's arguing it should be part of the same Maven artifact or something like that. That part, I think we're all on the same page. So this is really just about literally where the code lives on GitHub. So it's maybe a little bit less important from like a code bloat standpoint, but I think I would argue, but not strenuously, for having it in a separate location. If we wanted it to feel official or whatever, it could be we could have like an OpenTracing org rather than OpenTracing contrib org repository for translation layers and things like that, if you wanted to feel like it's part of the specification. But I know that when I go to a repository for something that's purporting to be simple, which is, the idea with OpenTracing, it's supposed to be a relatively thin API, and then I just see like, tens of thousands of lines of code strewn about across many directories with a lot of cruft. It doesn't have like the right optics in some way. So I wonder if there's a way to check your box head around like it feeling like a formal part of the specification that we're taking seriously, but somehow keep it out of the repository itself where it might be distracting or seem noisy. I don't know what others think, but that would be cool if we could check both those boxes.
Well, I wonder if a middle ground is, I definitely don't think it should be OpenTracing contrib. That just sounds like it's, this needs to be official backwards compatibility support from the OpenTracing community. But I wonder if it could just be another repo in OpenTracing as opposed to OpenTracing contrib. That would give it, I think, the right amount of visibility for what it is. Does that seem like a reasonable middle ground to people?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
How we will fix issues in this compatibility package?
How do you mean, Sergey?
Yeah, I mean, for example, I found one issue with text and it was fixed, but for example, I will find much more issues when it will be released. How we will release updated, fixed version of compatibility package of this shim layer?
Well, hopefully we could get all of those bugs worked out during the release candidate phase.
I'm not sure because looks like nobody used it because I started to use it and it's a pain. It's a pain because, for example, I cannot shim any tracer. Tracer should have scope manager which will be implement specific interface. Yes, I cannot use any scope manager implementation inside tracer which will be shimmed.
Okay, well, maybe this is another argument for being able to move it into its own repo then. Do you think that would allow us to have these things decoupled enough that we can continue to do work on that? We definitely need this thing vetted in reality. That's definitely the missing piece here. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, if I can say something. Yeah, Yuri, you were going to say something?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I was thinking that probably putting this shim layer on even if it's in the same OpenTracing repo, but having it separated would allow us to do more like bug fixing like faster, right? Probably. So that could be probably a good thing about that.
Okay. Any other comments on this? There seems to be agreement around moving it to its own package, or Git repo rather. Okay. I'm going to add that to the meeting notes. And let's maybe consider that item of topic settled unless someone else has anything else to say there. And really, like, the main thing is for the people who are tracing implementers on this call, just be prepared, starting next week to try to really vet this thing. As soon as we get a release candidate out of the new 31 API, we want to start vetting all of this stuff in reality. So let's make sure that we're setting some time aside in our schedules to do that work. All right. So there's a couple little bike sheds kind of left around the Java API around naming conventions. Should should start active, you know, have a Boolean that's required or be optional, etc. I don't think those are very controversial. The one that did seem to have some real open questions left was around the binary carrier, and I think we should have a bit of a discussion there. I think there's agreement that there shouldn't be an extra binary holder type or some other binary type. There should just be binary. But there was some debate, I think from Yuri maybe, about do we need a binary carrier at all, and what shape that should be if we are going to change it from its current shape, which is not useful. For background, what makes the current binary carrier awkward is it's a byte buffer where you have to know the size in advance, and that's not very useful. So we want to switch to something, if we're going to keep it, that is more like a streaming API. So let's open the floor to debate on that.
Yeah, I think that so far the effort is it's going well. I have been working on that. And I think I have been getting some feedback from Sergey and from Yuri, so I hope we can keep going. So the latest feedback, for example, from Sergey was to actually put that support into mock tracers, so he can actually, for example, try himself, like, you know, not only like playing around, but try it in a more serious fashion. So that's, for example, one step that I will be working on today. So I hope I can make some progress on that. And so the part on Yuri's feedback is that, yes, we were, he did mention a pair of possibilities on how to manage writing and reading and some things about the naming. So yeah, so unless Yuri has something else to say, I think I will just post an updated pull request later today and just wait for more feedback. And I don't know everybody else, but my impression is that we are going like, just iterating over it, but I hope that now we are closer, much closer than before to getting it actually done.
Does anyone have any questions about, there was some questions, I think, Yuri, you were raising about whether we needed binary. Do you feel like you satisfied that?
Well, it sort of, I think, was closed by the fact that Envoy uses binary in a different way, but that's fine.
Yeah. Sergey, you also, I think, had an example of a place you wanted to use the binary, right?
Yeah. In the Cassandra on the backend side, Cassandra uses payload, which is binary. Yes, it's a binary array, so I need to inject span context in the binary format in the array, byte buffer, and extract, of course.
Okay. And I think
as long as,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to say that you know, they're not on this call, but I've spoken with some of the people from Google working on OpenCensus and on Istio as well, and you know, they're really sensitive to any, like literally any performance impacts, even just like simple, you know, CPU churning performance impact on serialization and deserialization. And if they were on this call, they would certainly insist on having support for it.
Great.
If I can add a +1, yeah, in the financial world, like everything is to the microsecond sometimes, and we pay really attention to the size and how much time we spend in serializations. Yeah.
Sweet. By the way, point of process, Zoom has a raise hand function. I know it can be sometimes a little hard to jump in. Feel free to jump in whenever, but if you also raise your hand using that tool, I'll make sure to call on you. I think the other point of process on getting binary is whether that should go into 31. If there's some debate about this, should we delay in order to get that resolved? I personally think it absolutely should go into 31 because it's essentially a breaking change to the instrumentation API, and I feel like 31 should, since it's known, we should get it done in this iteration. But if anyone has any objections to that, please raise them.
What exactly were you referring to? The binary API change, is that?
Yeah, so the binary carrier in Java, being able to change that from a byte buffer to a streaming API, it's essentially the last piece of work that constitutes real work that's outstanding. That's a sort of known change to the instrumentation API. That would essentially be backwards incompatible. So I think we should get that out in the 31, even if that means delaying the release of 31 for a week. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sounds good to me. No concerns.
Sweet. All right, I think that settles that piece of the call. And that's really the last thing that was on the agenda regarding the new Java API. Before we move on to Python and the other APIs, does anyone have any other questions or comments? No? All right, sounds good. If you do, just put them on the agenda and we'll talk about it at the end. Okay, so next up is Python, which is the other sort of big API that's moving over to this active span process. And Manu, I believe you've been holding that down. Would you like to give an update?
Yeah, of course. So the current implementation of the API basically started following what the community did for Java. To be honest, such kind of approach, actually, I'm talking about what we are using inside Datadog, totally fits our needs because we used something similar mostly. A bit different, but the goal was always the same, having a scope manager to set and get and so on, providing different implementation based by your usage, asynchronous, not asynchronous, and so on. So for us, I mean, actually, I already wrote that one and also some changes for the basic tracer implementation. I think that Carlos iterated over it a couple of times at least. What would be great is having maybe more feedbacks from people, I mean, that are or tracer implementators that can start using it in the sense of, oh, okay, that could work for me, that may not work for me. Because actually, I mean, we are only relating, only relying in tests, personal examples, and stuff like that. So it would be better having more consensus about that. I don't know you, Yuri, if you have any concern about that, since you and Jaeger, you have, with Jaeger, you have a good client, Python client, and see.
Yeah, I want to take it for a spin. I just was swamped with other work, so I think once the Cloud Native Con is over, I will take a look. And because my biggest concern was that we've had a lot of pain with Tornado context propagation, and so I want to make sure that that works.
Exactly. About that, just to give us some more context about Tornado, in Datadog we are supporting Tornado with this kind of approach, but mostly we are hiding the real problem that is using a stack context. It's okay, Tornado things, but yeah, the API is kind of working, but it's not like the thread local storage, so that you really have just a getter and just a setter. So it's kind of, just to give more details about that. And so one thing that would be very great is, yes, keeping the conversation on also for Python. I know that Java is, of course, the highest priority right now, but if anyone is interested to jump in, it would be great. And about the example, Carlos, I mean, I think that in the meantime, while people if people may have more time, in the meantime, we can provide more examples, start trying this new API, and at some point I will start iterating over your comments. I think it could be the next step for Python.
Great, yeah. So for everybody who doesn't know about this effort, we have a small repo with Python examples. So yeah, I started porting them to this pull request that Manu has provided. I was stuck in the middle because, of course, there's so much Java stuff going on. But yeah, I hope I can find some cycles to finish that, and from that iterate. So I think that's a good plan. And yeah, well, I will try to put some cycles into that. Definitely.
Great.
Awesome. Does anyone have any other questions or comments about Python before we move on to PHP? Okay. Jose Carlos, looks like you're on the call. Whoop.
Hi.
Yep.
So yeah, basically we covered everything from V1. We had some iterations daily. We simplified the API in the last month, based on some feedback we got. And for like the most important piece now, or the most urgent piece now that we are lacking now is in-process context propagation. So for that, we are basically waiting for the Python pull request to get merged and then replicate the same approach in PHP. So yeah, that's basically what we are waiting for. The rest, we have exercised the API, although we are lacking the basic tracer and the mock tracer still. And yeah, once we have the Python pull request merge, we can replicate that and then open a pull request and see if it works for everyone, because there are two main pieces that we are lacking in PHP. One is that in-process context propagation, and the other one is the bulk caching. And those are very important before any tracing system in PHP can go into production. Just I would like to mention something about the bulk reporting. So I've been exploring the possibility of using agents and do bulk reporting through TCP. And I don't know if anyone has experience with Fluentd for basically general agents, but like that's what we are exploring now for some tracers that don't have agents, like Zipkin, for example. And seems like, as I said, this bulk reporting is a must in PHP production systems. So if anyone has experience with agents, Fluentd in particular, or custom written agents, I would love to have a chat now. Or well, not now, but later.
Anyone want to hop in with a Fluentd expertise?
I would just say that the Fluentd people, of course, will be around next week, and if it would be helpful for someone in OpenTracing world to meet with someone in the Fluentd world, that's pretty doable.
Great. Well, we'll see if we can make that happen. In the meantime, I'm sure we can do a shout out on Gitter about Fluentd.
Yeah, that would be nice. Like Fluentd is an open source alternative, but even if people have experience writing own or custom agents, I am up to have a talk and grab some experience around it. Because as I said for the third time, this is a must for PHP production systems.
Well, Datadog guys, you guys definitely write agents.
Yeah, for the PHP part actually, and at the moment, yes, we don't have enough expertise to say something about that. Let's say we prefer first to have our internal experiments, let's say, because yeah, mostly we didn't start on that.
Okay, TBD. I have one question. You know, we've been kind of gating some of these other APIs like PHP to wait, in particular for Java to get its model sorted out. But I wonder if we've converged enough on a simplified model that we don't need to necessarily be waiting any longer to attack these other APIs. I mean, there's a certain amount of bandwidth and availability, you know, for effort. But if you feel, Jose, like, or Jose Carlos, if you feel like you're just kind of waiting around, but would, you know, could move ahead, I'm wondering if you should just go ahead. What do you think about that?
So without in process context propagation in place, we cannot instrument common frameworks like RPC frameworks, like HTTP clients.
Yeah.
And that will make the instrumentation way more difficult. I would say that I would rather prefer to have that in place before, like I could now write middlewares and HTTP clients for this, but without in-process context propagation defined, I don't think anyone will adopt the PHP interfaces.
Do you feel comfortable moving ahead with that work in parallel with Python? I feel like the models have converged now that we're not doing continuations anywhere. Like beyond maybe wanting to do one pass where we make sure we name everything the same or similar. It could probably
that's another alternative. Sorry, someone said something.
No, please continue.
So yeah, that's one alternative. I haven't had time since like when the pull requests came up, and now I haven't had time to actually dedicate time to write implementation. But that's another alternative. Like I know there are 2 or 3 guys very eager to write a Jaeger implementation for PHP, and that's the piece they are lacking basically. So yeah, I think we could do that. That's doable.
All right, well, let's do that. I mean, if you've got the bandwidth and people are waiting to write tracers, I think we should just shove ahead and just make sure, you know, Manu and Jose Carlos, that you two are touching base on occasion, just around naming. But I don't think you should have to wait.
No. Something that is worth to mention is that PHP is still in beta. So if we release that and then we can get feedback, we can still like do some changes. We don't have to keep retrocompatibility. So yeah, makes sense.
I like it. Okay. I'm just going to add that to the notes. Quick. PHP. Okay. Anything else anyone wants to say on the PHP front before we move on? Oh, I have one question. Jose Carlos, do you feel like you're getting enough feedback? Oh, sorry, someone else was trying to talk.
Like people mostly giving feedback to the OpenTracing library in PHP. They're usually busy. So it's one guy is Ben Everley, and the other is Felix Becker, and they are the ones more active. I managed to get some other people on board, but like the good part about these 2 guys that I mentioned at the beginning is that they were very experienced with the language, so their comments were really idiomatic. And also Benjamin Everley is a vendor. He's the one running Tideways. So it was also great to have the experience from one vendor. Besides that, it's just people eager to do implementations. And Yeah, maybe if we could have like some more feedback from vendors like Yuri that sometimes contribute to OpenTracing PHP, that will be awesome. But yeah, I need to first open the pull request, of course.
Okay. Well, don't be shy about asking for reviews. I think one issue is a lot of vendors who write tracing systems tend to not have a lot of PHP experience in-house internally. So I think that's one of the reasons. But
yeah, so I was curious because I really believe that there are a lot of people with PHP monoliths, and they are probably trying to split it. And for that, they might need tracing. That's how I got involved into tracing. But apparently they are not there yet, or they already split their monoliths. I don't know what's going on, actually.
Chicken egg. Once they have OpenTracing, they'll want it.
Yeah. Well, Manu had some use cases, but like, still curious about why people don't knock the door yet, saying, "Hey, I need this in my monolith."
I think service mesh integration will also help, because PHP is usually run in a context of Nginx or Apache or some kind of management system.
Yeah, I think one barrier is that usually PHP host teams, they provide a server, but like if you want to, for instance, run Zipkin in your own instance and it's a shared server, then they won't make it, right? They need something like or either Datadog or either AWS X-Ray, and maybe that's not popular enough. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, I agree. Once they know it, they will ask for it.
Awesome. Okay, should we move on to C#? All right, so I just threw this one on here because I've noticed there's been a sort of uptick in interest in C# for OpenTracing. People have been asking about it on Gitter and elsewhere. And that project had kind of been put on hold, one for the Java API to get itself together around active span propagation, and the other being that Microsoft internally seemed to be on the cusp of releasing some new paradigm around tracing.NET. I'm not super familiar with any of this stuff, but I did notice all of that had kind of flown by. And Christian Weiss, who's not on the call, had kind of put it on ice while that got resolved. And I'm wondering if anyone who's on the call today has any insight as to where Microsoft is at with their own tracing efforts, and whether anyone has C# expertise and would be interested in working on that project.
Well, I was taking a look at the API that they are having. So it's so yeah, basically they have their own API for tracing. So I was thinking, and this is something I mentioned in some of the discussions in the C# repo, is that we could try out to maybe provide a wrapper on top of what they are doing just to prototype stuff, because I think at the moment there are no vendors who have like an actual tracer for C#. So I think at this moment, the only thing we could try is to try to prototype out stuff around that. And I think the effort or the interest that has been growing towards the C# space is, well, it's most of people who are very interested in it. But I mean, so even if it's not like actual people working full time or spending a decent amount of cycles, it could be still good to try to keep them interested. Sadly for me, I mean, I have C# experience, but sadly for me, you know, I am a little bit busy with other stuff like Python and Java. So, yeah, but at least from my side, I can take a deeper look after I have more time. I think Christian kinda left the project. He's still around, but he stopped putting some effort into that. So yeah, maybe we can find a way to make him interested again.
Yeah, for the Datadog point of view, I mean, we are interested too about that topic, definitely. Eventually, we will have a C# tracer, by the way, so it's very interesting to move sooner than later. And there is Bertrand, that was the guy that was the task to Christian about some feedbacks and also the current state. And actually, he's working with us, so what would be great is getting more, knowing if there are other people that are interested about that. And if you, Carlos, at some point you will start working on it, just, I mean, I think that it would be great for us, for everyone, if we start collaborating around C# so that we can push things forward. Basically what we did was providing a pull request just internally, just to see, okay, how will be the API if we use the same approach of Java. It's something that we can just push if someone just want to take a look. But it's the goal here, yes, it's first discussing about this new Microsoft thing, of course, and how things can be improved. But definitely, I mean, we are interested. Unfortunately, I can't provide more details because I'm not a C# expert, and Bertrand is not available today. But definitely, I mean, whenever we will have more details, we can, of course, share all of that with you.
Great. C# TBD, but it sounds like at least Datadog, Carlos, and hopefully Christian Weiss and a couple other people, if we kind of get enough of a, kernel of activity going around that API, I imagine other people who wouldn't want to hold it down but would be happy to contribute would start showing up. So that would definitely be useful. Maybe in January we can get that started.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left on the call. So I want to maybe pick up the pace a bit and just give a brief mention on some of these other topics. Service mesh is next up. BHS, do you want to say a couple words there? Assuming your voice works.
Sure. Yeah, it's sort of half functional. Yeah, not too much to say that people haven't heard before, but it seems, well, actually, Ted, you're the one who should get most of the credit for this, but there has been a bunch of activity with various service mesh relevant technologies sort of committing to OpenTracing in one form or another with
Oop, sounds like you cut out.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's going to be support in Istio itself, in addition to the Envoy support that's already there for OpenTracing, and there's already this work on Nginx and so on. So I'm going to be doing this talk at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con, that will certainly feature the basic story around service mesh, the basic story around OpenTracing, and then explain how they make each other better and that sort of thing. So hopefully it will generate some interest, and we're going to be doing a little brief thing at Matt Klein's Envoy workshop salon thing, and vice versa at ours. And it just seems like it's a topic that's getting a lot of attention for good reasons lately, and it's also something where I think OpenTracing has a really nice story because I think there's a misconception that you can trace the service mesh layer on its own and then be done with tracing. I don't think that's accurate. I think it's a really great way to get inter-process communication traced, but you still need to connect into the application layer. And I think OpenTracing has a really nice, elegant story for how to do that. So that's essentially what I'll be trying to talk about at KubeCon.
Awesome. Yeah, and my own 2 cents I would just throw in real quick is it's really proving to be useful, I think, because these service mesh technologies, they don't want to compile in every single flavor of tracer out there, right? The number of dependencies that would come in if they even tried to do that would really become burdensome to them, and then they would become sort of downstream. Part of your downstream for both updates to their technology and any sort of tracing plugin that shows up. We hit something similar with things like, volume providers, like storage providers in Kubernetes. So the fact that OpenTracing gives you a standard API opens the door to being able to sort of link in your tracer as a linked plugin, especially for these C++ implementations. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's taking off in that space. Okay, enough about that, so we can talk about other interesting things. So Jonathan Kaldor, Facebook, Canopy, you guys released a paper recently. Want to give a shout out about that?
Sure. So yeah, I guess we published in SOSP this year sort of a description of how Facebook's approaching tracing. A large portion of the paper is orthogonal, I think, to this discussion. It's more about how do you take trace data and extract information from it and then look at trace data in aggregate. So I guess we would be sort of a downstream dependency of the data flowing from OpenTracing pipelines. There's a bunch of other stuff in there, but I think the things that might be most interesting for people on this call are, so I guess our tracing model is slightly different than the OpenTracing one. Rather than doing parent-child span relationships, we have explicit sort of blocks, which are intervals in time, points, which are instants in time, and then edges that connect them together. And so we can represent sort of DAG-based structures. We've used it to record the continuation flow within our HHVM PHP execution engine, as well as things like capturing stack samples from periodic profilers. Kind of tied into some of the discussion from earlier, we have a decoupling of how the instrumentation that is wired into the code generates events, which are then reconstructed into a trace later. This kind of ties into, I think, to the versioning discussion earlier in the Java API. What we found is it's actually fairly impossible to keep people on the most recent version of any tracing API. And so we use this as a form of backwards compatibility. And so we can reinterpret events and structures from old versions of the trace, old version of the library, to map into any newer changes we've made. And there was one more thing that I wanted to bring up, but I've forgotten it by now. But in any case, if people have any questions or after reading it, any thoughts or feedback as well, I'd be happy to talk.
Great. If people are interested in that discussion, is there a place where it's happening they should go?
There isn't a place right now. If they want, I guess they can contact me directly and I can put them in contact with either other people on the team working on it, or if there's sufficient interest / sufficient number of people have questions, possibly on the next call, I could answer a few of them in line. But yeah, we should probably also set up a discussion forum or something for it as well.
Awesome.
I would love to hear more about this myself. And the thing that I like the most is that it's actually not that similar to the other tracing systems out there. There's definitely something I hear from people sometimes like, oh, well, we should just have everything be, basically the model from Dapper or Zipkin. And I've always felt like that model is actually kind of insufficient in many ways, and either because it's not descriptive enough or it's not adaptable enough to the heterogeneity of data out there. And I think one of the most interesting aspects of what you all have done with Canopy is to build something that actually doesn't map one-to-one from a data modeling standpoint. So yeah, I think it would be really great to understand more, especially with the motivations behind some of the data model stuff from a practical kind of getting into production standpoint, at least for me.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think And so that wasn't the third point that I had, but one of the things that we found is that we actually need to evolve our data model over time as we find that there's either more structure that we want to represent within traces or more information that we want to capture in some general way. And so this has let us sort of, we don't have to feel committed to a particular model. We can reinterpret the trace data that we've got to upcast it into newer forms of the model over time, which has definitely been useful because it has allowed us to roll out newer versions of the library without revisiting all of the RPC instrumentation and all of these services that unfortunately have not been deployed or redeployed or updated in years, which happens to us all the time.
Awesome. All right. Well, people get a hold of Jonathan Caldor, and I believe also Jonathan Mace, who's on the call earlier, worked on that system. So I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to people about it. And on that note, we are out of time. I just want to give one shout out to Jose Carlos, who I believe put up a question about templates for issues in PR. Jose Carlos, I would recommend just making an issue against the GitHub specification repo so we can discuss some like cross-language way of doing that, because I do think that's important. But I don't think we have time to discuss it on the call right now. And yeah.
So yeah, that's basically it. So just 30 seconds explanation. Sometimes we get some issues in the PHP API, and they are more like specification issues. So the way we solved it, the problem was to create an issue template and a PR template so we could got the right issues in the right place. And same for PRs. Like a PR cannot get a PR actually if you don't fulfill all these requirements. And that improved the flow of communication across contributors. It would be nice to escalate this across other OpenTracing languages.
Yeah. So 2 thumbs up for me on that. I look forward to seeing it. Okay, and that's all we have time for. Great seeing y'all, and hopefully I will see some of you at KubeCon next week. Ciao.
See you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.